Three HOA officers stormed onto my property on a Saturday morning. No knock, no call, cameras already rolling. I was pressure washing my driveway, my own driveway, the one my late wife and I moved into with nothing but 2 suitcases and a truck full of hope. The one I paid off early while this woman was still figuring out which subdivision she wanted to control next. The woman in front gets 6 inches from my face.
Shut that thing off! This is a violation!
I shut it off. The silence was loud. 2 years. 2 years of notices, fines, and threats. 2 years of watching her bully every neighbor on this block into silence. I looked at her, standing on my property, clipboard in hand, smirking, and thought, she has no idea. I didn't end up here by accident. I planned every single second of this. Stay with me. What would you have done? Drop it below. And where are you watching from? Let's see the map light up. Let me take you back 6 years, because before you can understand what happened on that Saturday morning, you need to understand who I am and who she is. My name is Garland Pruitt, 58 years old, former logistics supervisor, 2 bad knees, and a mortgage I paid off 3 years ahead of schedule. I'm not a fighter by nature. I'm a spreadsheet guy, a make your bed every morning, show up on time, keep your head down kind of man. My late wife Darlene used to say I had the patience of a saint and the stubbornness of a mule, and that both of those things would either save me or ruin me someday. She was right, about all of it. We bought our house in Maplecroft Commons, a subdivision in Riverton, Ohio, back in 2017. Vinyl-sided colonials, attached 2-car garages, oak trees lining every street. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and leave zucchini on each other's porches in August, because nobody can eat that much zucchini alone. The HOA existed, sure. Monthly dues, a pool nobody used, a newsletter nobody read. But it was background noise, manageable, boring even. Darlene planted a vegetable garden along the south fence that first summer. Tomatoes, zucchini, peppers. She was out there every morning in her garden gloves and her old Ohio State t-shirt, talking to the plants like they could hear her. I'd bring her coffee, and she'd give me a look that said I didn't ask for company, and don't you dare leave at the exact same time. Those were the best years of my life. She passed in 2019. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to gone. The kind of loss that doesn't announce itself all at once. It just quietly empties every room in the house, one by one, until you're standing in your own kitchen and nothing feels familiar anymore. I kept the garden going. It wasn't really about the vegetables. My daughter Breezy called every Sunday from Columbus. My neighbor Cornelius Webb on Sycamore brought over chili in the winter and never made a big deal about it. Life settled into something quiet, manageable. I had my house, my garden, my Saturday routine of bad coffee and country radio on the back porch. Then Wanda Shear moved in. 2020. Pandemic transplant from Columbus. Sold her condo for a pile of cash and landed in Maplecroft Commons like a weather system that hadn't been on the forecast. Within 4 months, she was on the HOA board. Within 8 months, she was president. I remember thinking, good for her, I guess. I had tomatoes to water. I should have paid closer attention. The first sign wasn't the notice she sent me. It was what she said at the first board meeting I attended. A nothing agenda, routine stuff. A neighbor had asked about repainting their shutters a slightly different shade of gray. Wanda listened, smiled, and said, "We have standards here. That's what separates us from other neighborhoods." The way she said other neighborhoods, I felt it in my back teeth. The first formal notice arrived in March of 2022, certified mail. My driveway was in visible disrepair. 30 days to fix it, or $150 per week. I walked outside and looked at my driveway. Then I looked at every other driveway on my street. Mine looked identical to all of them. Mine was the only one cited. I checked the CC and Rs. I researched Ohio HOA law. I wrote a polite, documented response. Wanda responded through the HOA attorney, who billed the association $300 for a 2-paragraph letter, essentially saying, "Nice try, fix the driveway." So I fixed it, pressure washed it, sealed it, made it look better than the day it was poured. Clean lines, good work. I was proud of it, actually. And that was my mistake. Not fixing the driveway, that was fine. The mistake was believing that compliance would satisfy her. Petty people don't see compliance as resolution. They see it as confirmation that you'll fold. That was the moment I realized. This woman wasn't going to stop, so neither was I. The second notice arrived 6 weeks later. This one was about the garden beds. Specifically, it alleged that the raised wood planters along my south fence, 8 feet long, 2 feet tall, filled with Darlene's tomatoes and peppers, were a permanent structure requiring board approval under Section 7.4(b) of the Community Guidelines. Fine proposed, $200, plus a $75 processing fee to submit a landscape modification request form. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee going cold, reading that notice 3 times. I want you to picture these planters. They were not a deck. They were not a shed. They were 2 wooden boxes filled with dirt and tomato plants that my dying wife had built with her own hands on a Tuesday afternoon in May, because she wanted to grow something while she still could. She'd come inside that evening with soil under her fingernails and paint on her jeans, and the specific satisfaction of a woman who had decided that cancer could take a lot of things, but it was not taking her garden. That's what Wanda Shear had decided was her business. I folded the notice and put it in a manila folder, wrote on the tab with a black Sharpie. I won't tell you what I wrote. This is a family channel. I didn't call a lawyer, not yet. What I did instead was pick up the phone and start calling neighbors, because something about that notice felt wrong, in a way I couldn't quite name. Not just unfair, specifically unfair. Targeted unfair. The kind of unfair that has a direction to it. Cornelius Webb on Sycamore answered on the second ring. He'd received 2 notices, one about an oil stain on his driveway that had been there since the Obama administration, and one about a basketball hoop that had lived in his yard for 11 years without complaint. Patricia Huang on Birchwood had been cited for excessive outdoor decor, wind chimes, her wind chimes that had been hanging on her porch since 2015. And Desmond Achterberg, newest neighbor on the block, just moved from Pittsburgh, had been cited for installing a storm door without board approval, even though the exact same storm door model was sitting on 4 other houses within eyeshot. I wrote all of it down. Then I sat back and looked at the list. Every single cited household was either a minority family, a working-class homeowner, or someone who had spoken up at a board meeting. Not one citation had gone to any property on Wanda's street. Not one. In 17 months of her presidency. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a pattern. And I spent 30 years in logistics. Patterns were my entire career. So I did what any self-respecting spreadsheet guy would do. I went to Bass Pro, bought a $40 trail camera, and mounted it on my front porch angled to cover the driveway and street. Bought a second one for the back fence. Then I started photographing every cited property and every non-cited property, side by side, printed out, dated, annotated. I built a comparison chart that would have made my old supervisor weep with professional pride. Then I found the legal move that changed everything. I'd been reading through Ohio HOA statutes, not exactly beach reading, but desperate times, when I came across Ohio Revised Code 531.2.12. Tucked in there, quiet as you please, was a provision that said, HOA members have a legal right to inspect all association records upon written request. Enforcement notices, financial statements, meeting minutes, all of it. And the HOA is required to comply. I remember reading that paragraph twice, the way you reread a text message that seems too good to be true. They have to give me everything. Every notice they'd ever sent, every fine they'd ever collected. All of it, on paper, with my name on the request letter. The kind of thing I wished I'd known 2 years earlier. If you're in an HOA right now, and you've ever felt like something wasn't adding up, look up your state's equivalent of that statute. 10 minutes of searching could be the most valuable 10 minutes you spend. I sent the written request via certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon and kept the receipt. Wanda's response came through Denton Farce, the treasurer, a Dockers on weekends type who laughed too loud at Wanda's jokes and had the specific energy of a man permanently auditioning for her approval. He called to tell me the records needed to be organized before release. Lynette Griff, the board secretary, posted on the community Facebook page, without naming me, but everyone knew, about nuisance records requests that waste association resources. That post got 34 likes from Wanda's inner circle. It also got 1 reply from Cornelius Webb that simply read, "Name them." I gave them a 10-day deadline. comply with the statute, or I would file a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Section, which has actual jurisdiction over HOA misconduct. The records arrived on day 9. I spread them across my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, made a fresh pot of coffee, the good stuff, the kind Darlene used to make me save for special occasions. Outside, October wind was pushing dead leaves across the driveway, that dry, papery rustle that sounds like the whole yard whispering at once. 23 months of enforcement notices, all 41 of them. 34, 83%, had gone to 6 households. All 6 were either minority-owned or had publicly disagreed with the board at some point. And in 23 months, not a single notice had been issued to any property on Wanda's street. Not one. I put the highlighter down, sat in the quiet kitchen for a long moment. Darlene's reading glasses were still on the windowsill above the sink, right where she'd left them. I'd never moved them, couldn't bring myself to. I picked up my phone and called Breezy. "Hey Dad, you okay?" "Yeah." I looked at the stack of papers, the yellow lines, the red circles. "I'm better than okay. I'm organized." Wanda, apparently, had been tipped off. I don't know who talked. In a subdivision of 230 homes, somebody always talks. It's practically a civic duty. And before I could make my next move, she made hers. At the September board meeting, held in the community center room that smelled permanently of old carpet and burnt coffee, Wanda presented a new amendment to the HOA fee structure. Starting January 1st, any property with an unapproved landscape modification would be assessed a monthly maintenance surcharge of $85. The amendment passed 3-0 in about 4 minutes. I wasn't there, because I hadn't known about the meeting. The rescheduling notice had been pinned to the community board in the mailroom, under 3 layers of other flyers, approximately the size of an index card, in a font I would generously describe as aggressively unreadable. I found it 2 days after the meeting when I went to check my mail and happened to move a flyer for a lost cat named Professor Whiskers. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long moment, staring at the index card. The September air coming through the window smelled like cut grass, and the first faint edge of something cooler, that specific Ohio smell that means summer is done arguing and fall has won. I wasn't angry. I was something colder than angry. I was certain this woman wasn't going to stop, certain that polite, documented responses weren't going to be enough, and certain, for the first time, that I needed help. I called Adeline Marsh the next morning. Adeline was a real estate and HOA attorney out of Dayton, mid-40s, direct as a 2x4, with the kind of office that had too many files and not enough shelves, and somehow still felt completely under control. She reviewed my folder across her cluttered desk while I drank coffee that had clearly been sitting on the burner since approximately the Eisenhower administration. She didn't say much while she read. Lawyers who talk a lot while they read are, in my experience, not the ones you want. She looked up after 20 minutes. "They've made at least 4 procedural violations I can identify right now," she said, tapping the stack. "The amendment wasn't properly noticed. The record's delay was a statutory violation. And this pattern?" She held up my highlighted comparison chart. "This is Fair Housing Act territory." I had come in expecting a property dispute, a neighbor problem, a strongly worded letter, and a negotiated settlement. Adeline was describing a civil rights case. I'll be honest, before that meeting, I'd had only a vague sense of what the Fair Housing Act actually covered. I knew it had something to do with not being able to refuse to sell someone a house. What I didn't know, what most people don't know, was that it goes much further than that. I'd stumbled across a legal forum thread a few weeks earlier about a case in Georgia, a homeowner who'd fought an HOA using a provision called Section 3604, which covers not just the sale of homes, but the terms and conditions of living in one. The court had found that applying HOA rules predominantly against minority homeowners, even if the rules themselves seemed neutral on paper, could constitute federal housing discrimination. The settlement amount wasn't public, but the attorney's quote in the local paper was, "The numbers were significant." I'd bookmarked that thread at midnight and thought, Sitting across from Adeline, it felt less like a bookmark and more like a loaded weapon. She filed 2 things that week: a formal complaint with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission and a letter to the HOA board citing every procedural violation she'd found and requesting a formal hearing within 30 days. Wanda's response came not through the HOA attorney, but through a handwritten note left directly in my mailbox. no postage, which, and I mention this purely as an interesting fact, is technically a federal offense. I'm not saying Wanda knew that. I'm saying she really should have. The note read, "I would encourage you to think carefully about the relationships you are poisoning in this community." I photographed it, dated it, put it in the folder. Then Adeline called. Buried in the HOA financial statements was a line item in the reserves fund, $22,400, labeled Legal Consulting, Contract 7. No contract attached, no vendor name, no board vote in any meeting minutes. $22,000. Gone. Garland, do you know who Wanda Shear's brother-in-law is? I did not. Hollis Greer, property management consulting firm out of Dublin, Ohio. The kitchen was very still. I could hear the refrigerator running. I could hear my own breathing. Was it ever formally bid out? I asked. It was not. I looked at Darlene's reading glasses on the windowsill. Still there, still waiting. This had started as a fight about a vegetable garden, about 2 wooden boxes full of tomatoes that a woman had built when she knew she was running out of time. And now it was something else entirely. Adeline, I said, how deep does this go? She paused just long enough to tell me everything. Keep reading, she said. The third notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. I read it once, put it down, picked it up and read it again. My driveway, the one I had pressure washed, sealed, and made look better than any other driveway on the block, now had a non-standard finish inconsistent with community aesthetic guidelines. I needed to restore it to its original condition. Its original condition. The cracked, green, algae-stained, weathered original condition that she had cited me for in the first place. I sat at my kitchen table and I genuinely did not know whether to laugh or put my fists through the wall. She had fined me for a dirty driveway. I cleaned it. Now she was fining me for a clean driveway. Same concrete. Same 30 by 20 feet of property I owned, maintained, and paid taxes on. Wanda Shear had somehow constructed a world in which there was no version of my driveway, dirty or clean, cracked or sealed, algae-covered or spotless, that was acceptable to her. That wasn't enforcement. That was a message. You don't get to win. I added the notice to the folder, which was now 1.5 inches thick and had required a second binder clip, and I started making phone calls, because I was done being the only one in this fight. Cornelius Webb came over that Thursday evening. He didn't call ahead, just knocked, stood on my porch with a 6-pack of Yingling and a manila folder under his arm, and said, "I heard you've been busy." We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. He had 2 years of his own notices, carefully kept, rubber-banded by month, and a quiet fury about them that he'd been carrying alone because he hadn't known what to do with it. Hadn't known there was anything to do. "I thought this was just how it worked," he said at one point, staring at the table. "I thought I just had to take it." That sentence stayed with me. Patricia Huang forwarded me email threads that same week, actual board emails that Lynette had accidentally CC'd her on during a reply-all mishap. Reading them felt like watching someone pick pockets on a security camera. Every move deliberate, every target chosen in advance. Wanda and Lynette coordinating which properties to cite next, what language to use, how to time the notices. Clinical, cheerful even. The cheerfulness was somehow the worst part. And then there was Desmond Ochterberg, the quiet one on the corner of Maple and 4th, who'd moved from Pittsburgh 8 months earlier and turned out to have 15 years of commercial real estate behind him. I showed him the $22,400 Contract 7 line item on a Wednesday evening, the kitchen smelling of the reheated soup I'd forgotten to eat, the financial statement spread across the table under the overhead light. He looked at it for 45 seconds. "Related party transaction," he said. "In commercial real estate, this requires explicit board disclosure and member approval. You can't pay your brother-in-law's company $22,000 from association funds without telling the membership. That's not a gray area, Garland. That's not even close to a gray area." What I'd since read confirmed it. Ohio's Planned Community Act is specific on this point. Any transaction between an HOA and a board member's related party requires disclosure to the full membership and a proper approval vote. No exceptions, no informal arrangements, no line items without backup. What Wanda had done wasn't just ethically questionable. Under Ohio law, it had a different name entirely. Desmond pulled up 3 years of financial statements on his laptop, cross-referenced every line item against the meeting minutes with the focused quiet of a man who had done due diligence on $30 million properties, and found this, if anything, more personally offensive. The $22,400 to Hollis Greer, an additional $8,300 in administrative fees with zero documentation, and $31,640 in fines, collected under enforcement rules we were about to discover had never been legally valid in the first place. "Garland," he said, still not looking up, "do you have the original CC and Rs, the ones filed with the county recorder?" I had the version Wanda had distributed in 2021. I'd assumed it was the official document. Desmond looked at me over his laptop with an expression that said, "Oh, this is going to be something." That sent me to Cornelius, who had been here since 2008, who kept everything. 3 days later, his voice on the phone was very quiet and very careful. "Garland, I need you to sit down." By the end of that week, 12 people were crowded around my kitchen table. Cornelius, Patricia, Desmond, and Marvella Oates, retired teacher from the end of the block, 71 years old, reading glasses on a beaded chain, who had shown up with a casserole dish and a 2-year paper trail of her own fines, and said, before she even sat down, "Tell me what I can do." She wasn't loud about her anger. She was the kind of angry that's been sitting quiet for a long time and has decided it's done being quiet. I looked around that table, at the folders, the printed emails, the financial statements, the 2 versions of the CC and R, Wanda's and the original, sitting side by side. "So what do we do?" someone asked. I thought about Darlene's tomatoes, about the notice that had started all of this, about Cornelius saying, "I thought I just had to take it," like it was the most natural thing in the world to be treated that way. "We set a trap," I said. Cornelius Webb called me on a Tuesday evening. "Garland," he said, "I need you to sit down." I sat down. He'd been going through old documents, the kind of careful, methodical archiving that people of his generation did before everything lived in a cloud somewhere, when he found it. A copy of the original Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions for Maplecroft Commons, the real one, filed with the Riverton County Recorder's Office in 1998, stamped, indexed, legally binding. He compared it to the version Wanda had distributed when she took over as president in 2021. They were different documents, not slightly different, not a few updated clauses, fundamentally different in the sections that mattered most, the ones that had been used to fine 16 families for 2 years. Section 7.4b, the rule used to cite my garden beds as an unapproved permanent structure, did not exist in the original recorded CC and Rs. Neither did the outdoor decor standards used against Patricia's wind chimes. Neither did the driveway finish requirement she'd used against me twice. Neither did the storm door approval process used against Desmond. 4 sections, 4 enforcement rules, used to collect real money from real people, never legally adopted, never voted on, never recorded with the county. Here's the thing about HOA amendments that most homeowners don't know, and I didn't know it either until Adeline sat me down and walked me through it slowly, the way you explain something to someone whose blood pressure is visibly rising. Under Ohio's Planned Community Act, you can't just write new rules, hand them out in a welcome packet, and start fining people. Amendments require member notification, a formal vote, and recording with the county recorder. The document on file at the courthouse is the document that governs. Everything else, everything Wanda had been enforcing for 2 years, was words on paper she'd invented and dressed up to look like law, which meant every dollar collected under those 4 sections had been collected without legal authority. Desmond did the math that same night. He sat at my kitchen table with 3 years of financial statements and a fresh legal pad, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the room, the November dark pressing flat against the kitchen windows like it was trying to get in. He worked for 40 minutes without looking up. I made coffee, didn't drink it. He put the pen down. $31,640, he said, collected from 16 homeowners, under rules that were never legally valid. He slid the legal pad across the table. I looked at the number, then at the list of 16 names beside it: Cornelius, Patricia, Marvella, and 11 others. People who had written checks and stayed quiet because they thought that was just how it worked, because nobody told them they had options, because Wanda had been very careful to make sure they never found out. Plus the $22,400 to Hollis Greer. No disclosure, no vote. Plus $8,300 in administrative fees with no documentation of any kind. Total, just over $62,000. Gone. This isn't just civil, Desmond said quietly. Collecting fines under invalid authority, undisclosed related party payments, misappropriation of association funds. He paused. This is potentially criminal, Garland. The kitchen was very still. Outside, the first hard cold of November had arrived overnight. The kind that settles into the bones of an old house and makes every room feel slightly smaller, slightly more serious. I looked at Darlene's reading glasses on the windowsill. Still there, still waiting. This had started with a $200 fine on a Tuesday morning. 2 wooden boxes of tomatoes. A woman who wanted to grow something while she still could. I pulled the legal pad toward me, looked at the 16 names, thought about Cornelius saying, I thought I just had to take it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Not anymore. I picked up my pen. Okay, I said. Let's build the trap. The next 3 weeks were the busiest of my retirement. The logistics supervisor in me woke all the way up. I mapped it out the way I used to map supply chains. 3 parallel tracks running simultaneously, all converging on one point. 1 legal, 1 community, 1 physical. Every piece had to land in the right order, or the whole thing fell apart. Track 1 was Adeline and Gerald. Gerald Taft was a fair housing attorney out of Cincinnati that Adeline had brought in. Mid-50s, calm as still water, with the quiet confidence of a man who had walked into a lot of rooms where people underestimated him and walked out having won. He reviewed everything in 2 days, called Adeline back and said, "Tell your client to stop settling." "He hasn't offered to settle anything," Adeline said. "Good, keep it that way." Together they filed 2 complaints simultaneously, and the simultaneity was the whole point. A formal complaint with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission documenting the selective enforcement pattern, and a separate complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Section, focused on the unrecorded C, and R amendments and the related party payments to Hollis Greer. 2 agencies, 2 jurisdictions, 2 clocks running at once. When a respondent faces one complaint, they can stall. Lawyers write letters, deadlines get pushed, months disappear. When they face 2 simultaneous complaints from 2 different agencies, stalling one doesn't stop the other. There's no quiet period to regroup, no room to breathe. I hadn't known this before Adeline explained it, and I'm telling you now because if you're ever in a similar situation, file everything you have, everywhere you can, all at once. Gerald also sent a formal demand letter. Return every dollar collected under the unrecorded amendment sections, all $31,640, within 30 days, or face a federal fair housing lawsuit. Certified mail, Monday morning. I kept the receipt. Track 2 was Cornelius. He visited each of the 16 affected homeowners personally, on foot. No phone calls, no group texts. Just a man who had lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, knocking on doors and sitting at kitchen tables and explaining, quietly and specifically, what had been found. He brought the 1-page summary I'd written. The rules used to fine you were never legally adopted. The money you paid may not have been legally owed. He said later that most people read it twice, looked up at him, and said some version of, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't think I was allowed to say so." 12 of the 16 joined the unified demand. 3 said they'd watch. 1 had his own calculations going. I'll leave it at that. Marvella Oates became our den mother, organized the paperwork, tracked who had signed what, showed up to every meeting with food and a yellow legal pad. 30 years of managing 8th graders had given her a talent for keeping a room focused that no amount of professional training can replicate. At one point, Desmond and I got into a 20-minute debate about the precise legal language of the demand letter, and Marvella said, without looking up from her notepad, "Boys, pick one and move on." We picked one. Track 3 was the trap. The pressure washing was not spontaneous. It was bait, deliberate, considered, carefully timed. Because I had watched Wanda for 2 years, and I understood something about her that she didn't understand about herself. She could not let things go. It was structural, pathological almost. She had cited my driveway twice. She had a notice on file about it. If she drove past on a Saturday morning and saw me pressure washing, she would come. Not because it was strategically smart, because she was built that way. Some people mistake the inability to let something go for strength. In Wanda's case, it was the door I was going to walk right through. First, I sent the board a certified notice. Adeline's language, precise and unambiguous. Any unannounced visit to my property by board members would be treated as harassment under Ohio Revised Code 5312 and reported to law enforcement. Wanda signed for it herself. Then I called Trevor Spink. Trevor did HVAC, had put ductwork in half the houses on our block, knew every crawl space and attic in the subdivision, and had been cited 6 months earlier for parking his work van in his own driveway while he was actively on a job call across the street. The van had been there for 2 hours. He'd received a formal notice with a $100 fine. He had not forgotten about it. Trevor was in before I finished the sentence. His job? Park around the corner Saturday morning with his dash cam running, covering the street from the south end. Desmond would be inside with a laptop, live streaming to a private channel. Adeline, Gerald, and Claudette Farr, a reporter from the Riverton Courier who covered the city beat and had been quietly circling HOA stories for months. Cornelius would be parked 2 houses north, phone recording through the windshield. Breezy was coming home for the weekend. She'd be upstairs with my personal phone, second angle, everything captured. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I could record any conversation I was part of without notifying anyone else. I had confirmed this with Adeline, looked it up myself, and confirmed it again at midnight the week before, because I am, at heart, a logistics man, and logistics men verify. The last piece was the one nobody in that kitchen knew about except me and Adeline. 3 days before Saturday, she had forwarded the full financial crimes evidence package to the Riverton County Sheriff's Office with a formal referral. The Sheriff's Office had quietly opened a preliminary inquiry. A financial crimes investigator from the AG's office had been assigned. They needed to serve a preservation order on the HOA's financial records. They needed an address to come to. They had mine. The night before, I set my alarm for 7, made a full batch of my mother's biscuits, her recipe, the one that takes 40 minutes and fills the whole house with the smell of butter and warm flour, and something that feels, despite everything, like home. I set my work boots by the door. Everything was in place. 3 tracks, 12 neighbors, 2 attorneys, 1 reporter, 2 investigators who didn't know they were walking into a trap, and 1 pressure washer. All I had to do was wash my driveway. Wanda wasn't stupid. She had received Adeline's formal notice. She had received the AG complaint notification. She had received Gerald Taft's demand letter. 30 days, return the money, or federal lawsuit. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what shape it was going to take. And that uncertainty made her dangerous. The week before Saturday, she made 3 moves, each one more desperate than the last. Each one leaving a trail she didn't realize she was leaving. Move 1. She called Riverton's code enforcement office and filed a complaint alleging that my pressure washing had caused improper drainage management, runoff into the street drain, potential environmental violation, the whole performance. It was a transparent attempt to get a city official involved on her side before I could get one involved on mine. The code enforcement officer who caught the case was a man named Bert, 19 years with the city, the specific tiredness of a man who has seen every flavor of neighbor dispute and developed, over 2 decades, a finely calibrated detector for nonsense. He drove by my house on a Thursday afternoon, took 1 photograph of a perfectly normal residential driveway, noted that the street drain in question was clear and functional, and closed the complaint as unsubstantiated. He did this on his lunch break. The complaint had eaten into his Thursday, and he had not appreciated it. Bert, if you're watching this, thank you for your service. Move 2. Lynette posted on the community Facebook page. This had become something of a habit for Lynette. Long, carefully vague posts about community harmony and outside agitators that never named anyone but managed to communicate exactly who and what she meant to anyone paying attention. This one alleged that certain members and their attorneys were attempting to destabilize everything we've built here, and that the board was exploring all legal options to protect homeowners who share our values. She used the phrase, our values, 4 times. Nobody who read it failed to understand what she meant. The replies came fast. 32 responses in 2 hours, the overwhelming majority ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. But the one that stopped me cold, the one I screenshot and still have, came from Marvella Oates, who had never once posted anything on that Facebook group in 4 years of membership. She wrote, "I paid $200 under rules that didn't legally exist. I would like my $200 back, Lynette." 47 likes. In a subdivision of 230 homes, that is roughly a standing ovation. Lynette did not respond. The post stayed up, which was somehow worse for her than taking it down. Move 3 was the one that crossed the line. On a Wednesday evening, Denton Farce showed up at Cornelius Webb's front door. No call ahead. Just knocked, stood on the porch in his Dockers, and when Cornelius answered, told him, with the specific discomfort of a man doing something he knows is wrong but has convinced himself is necessary, that he'd heard Cornelius was involved in the legal situation and wanted to let him know there was a record of a fence installation at his property from 2016 that had never been properly approved and could result in significant fines if things continued to escalate. Cornelius was a union steward for 15 years before he retired. He had been negotiated at, pressured, and quietly threatened by people with considerably more skill than Denton Farce. He said nothing, smiled politely, and closed the door. Then he called me. Then I called Adeline. Adeline's voice went very precise, the way it did when she just identified something legally significant. What Denton had done wasn't just bad manners. Showing up to warn a witness or complainant about potential adverse HOA action if they continued to escalate a civil rights complaint, that was potentially illegal retaliation under federal fair housing law. Potentially obstruction. She added it to the AG filing that same evening. Takeaway: if you're ever in this situation, document every contact, every visit, every phone call, every note in the mailbox. What feels like intimidation usually is, and in a civil rights context, it has a legal name. I sat on my back porch that Thursday night. The air smelled of dying leaves and someone 3 streets over burning brush, that particular Ohio October smell that always makes me think of high school football and cold apple cider, and the specific feeling of a season ending. The cicadas had gone quiet for the year. The oak trees were almost bare. I thought, one more day. I thought, let them come. Friday passed in a deceptive quiet. I mowed my lawn in the morning, exactly 4 inches, per the CC and Rs I was actually required to follow. I waved at neighbors. I did not check my phone more than necessary. I was, outwardly, a retired man having a normal Friday. Inwardly, I was running checklists. Camera batteries, checked. Live stream link sent to Adeline, Gerald, Claudette, and all 12 coalition members the night before. Certified notice receipt in my jacket pocket, the one proving Wanda had been formally warned about unannounced visits. Trevor confirmed his position in dashcam. Desmond had done a test run of the live stream setup at 7 that morning, and everything worked. In the afternoon, I brought a Tupperware of biscuits to Marvella Oates. She lived 3 houses down in a colonial nearly identical to mine, except her front porch had wind chimes. Small brass ones that made a sound like distant church bells when the October breeze moved through them. She'd put them up after her husband passed, she told me, because she liked the idea of something in the house always moving, always making a little noise. Wanda had never cited her for them. Different street. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of her lavender candle mixing with the butter from the biscuits in a way that felt unexpectedly warm, and she told me about the 2 years she'd spent paying fines quietly. I thought it was just how things worked, she said. I thought maybe I just didn't understand the rules. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial person. I just thought, well, they sent a notice, so I must have done something wrong. She looked at her tea. Nobody told me I had options, she said. I drove home with that sentence sitting in my chest like a stone. Because that was it. That was the whole thing, distilled down to one sentence. Wanda's entire operation had depended on people not knowing they had options, on the assumption that authority, even illegitimate authority, would be obeyed if it was dressed up convincingly enough and delivered in a certified mail envelope. That evening, the coalition held its final call. 12 homeowners, Adeline and Gerald on the line from their respective offices, Desmond at his laptop, and Claudette Farr, quiet, observant, asking precise questions in the way that good reporters do. The kind that sound simple, but aren't. Gerald had been busy that week. Additional research on Hollis Greer's firm had turned up something significant. In the last 3 years, the company had received payments from 3 different HOAs in central Ohio. All 3 had leadership connected to Wanda's extended network. In 2 of the 3, there had been homeowner complaints about selective enforcement that had gone nowhere. This wasn't a Maplecroft Commons problem. This was a pattern, possibly a scheme. And Claudette, who had been quiet for most of the call, asked one question at the end. How many families, total, across all 3 HOAs? Gerald did the math quietly. Somewhere north of 40, he said. The call went silent for a moment. Claudette said, "Okay." Just that. But the way she said it told me she was already writing the first paragraph in her head. After the call, Breezy came downstairs from the guest room where she'd been studying pharmacology notes. She found me at the kitchen table, not working, just sitting with a cold cup of coffee and the specific stillness of a man who has done everything he can do and is now waiting. "You sure you want to do this tomorrow?" she asked. "I'm just going to wash my driveway," I said. "Right. Everything else is just people responding to a man doing a completely normal thing on a Saturday morning." She sat across from me, looked at the folders, the legal pads, the 2 versions of the CC and Rs still sitting side by side, on the corner of the table where they'd been for 2 weeks. "You know, Darlene would have been completely obsessed with all of this," she said. "She would have had color-coded folders, tabs, probably a timeline on the wall." I laughed. The first full, real laugh I'd had in longer than I could remember. It surprised me, the way a real laugh does when you haven't had one in a while, like finding something in a coat pocket you'd forgotten was there. "I know," I said. "I got it from her." Breezy reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. Didn't say anything else, didn't need to. I set my alarm for 7, put my work boots by the door, turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the oak trees were completely bare now. The street was quiet and dark and waiting. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow it ends. 7:45 a.m. I turned on the pressure washer. The sound hit the neighborhood like a starting pistol, that high-pressure crack bouncing off houses and fences, vibrating in my chest, filling the cold October air with the sharp mineral smell of pressurized water on concrete. My breath came out in small clouds. The driveway was already turning dark and clean in long, satisfying strips. For about 2 minutes, everything was peaceful. 8:02 a.m. The black SUV turned onto my street. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around immediately. I finished the strip I was working on. Clean, even, right to the edge. Set the wand down and turned off the machine. The silence that followed was enormous. Wanda got out first. Navy polo, reading glasses on her head, clipboard under her arm, with the purposeful stride of a woman who had decided this was going to go her way. Denton followed. Khakis, hands in his pockets, the look of a man who had made a series of increasingly bad decisions and was only now beginning to understand their combined weight. Lynette last, phone already out, already recording. They didn't knock, didn't wait at the end of the driveway, didn't call out from the street. They walked straight through my gate, up my driveway, onto my property. What they did not see, the 2 trail cameras on my porch, both rolling. Desmond visible as a shape through the front window, laptop open, live stream active. Adeline, Gerald, Claudette, and 9 of the 12 coalition homeowners watching in real time. Cornelius 2 houses north in his truck, phone up. Trevor around the corner, dash cam covering the south end of the street. What they also did not see, the unmarked sedan parked at the far end of the block that had been there since 7:50. Wanda began her offer. She was smooth about it, I'll give her that. Drop the pending fines, fresh start. A goodwill gesture from the board. All I had to do was withdraw the AG complaint and the Civil Rights Commission filing. She made it sound reasonable. She made it sound almost kind. She used the word community 6 times in 4 minutes, which I counted because I had nothing else to do while she talked. I let her finish. Then I said, "Before we discuss anything, the $22,400 paid to Hollis Greer, was that voted on in a properly noticed meeting?" Something shifted behind her eyes. Not panic, not yet. Something more like recalculation. "I don't think this is the place for that conversation," she said. "Okay." I reached into my jacket pocket and produced the certified mail receipt, her signature, her date, the formal harassment warning Adeline had drafted. Then I want you to know that this conversation is currently being live-streamed to approximately 20 people, including 2 attorneys and a reporter from the Riverton Courier. And this, I held up the receipt, is the notice you signed 14 days ago stating that any unannounced visit to this property constitutes harassment under Ohio Revised Code 5312. Lynette stopped recording. Her phone hand dropped to her side. Denton took one step backward, then another. Wanda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. And that was when the doors of the unmarked sedan opened. 2 men walked up the driveway, unhurried, professional. The first introduced himself as a financial crimes investigator from the Ohio AG's office. The second was a Riverton County Sheriff's deputy. They were there, the investigator explained in a calm and businesslike voice, to serve a formal preservation order on all Maplecroft Commons HOA financial records, a step triggered by the criminal referral filed earlier that week. He then informed Wanda and Denton that based on evidence already provided, formal financial crimes charges were being pursued, and that based on a witness statement regarding Denton's visit to a complainant's home earlier that week, both he and Lynette were being served notices related to a witness intimidation inquiry. Wanda started to argue, confident at first, the board meeting voice, the parking lot voice, the voice that had run this neighborhood for 3 years. The investigator let her go for about 30 seconds. Then he showed her a document. She stopped talking. The handcuffs were not dramatic. No shouting, no struggle. Just the quiet, procedural click of metal. The investigators practiced movements, the specific sound of consequence arriving right on schedule. Cornelius stepped out of his truck and walked over, stood beside me on my driveway. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the bare oak trees in long, clean lines. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking. The whole street was watching, from driveways and front windows, and nobody was pretending they weren't. "Hell of a Saturday morning," Cornelius said. I looked at my driveway. Clean concrete, straight lines, good work. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, it is." The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. The Ohio AG's office had been quietly building a pattern case across 3 counties. Desmond's financial audit, Cornelius's original CC&R documents, the statistical enforcement breakdown, and the Maplecroft Commons evidence turned out to be the clearest, most complete package they'd seen. Within 6 weeks, Wanda Shear and Denton Farce were formally charged with misappropriation of HOA funds and financial fraud. Hollis Greer, Wanda's brother-in-law, the consultant who'd received $22,400 from a fund he'd never been disclosed to the membership, was charged separately with conspiracy. Lynette Griff cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. She provided documentation that strengthened the fraud case considerably. She also, quietly, called Cornelius to apologize. He received the apology with more grace than she probably deserved. The fair housing settlement came 4 months later. The HOA, now under emergency interim management, appointed by the county, agreed to return every dollar collected under the unrecorded amendment sections. All $31,640 distributed back to 16 households. Cornelius got $2,100. Marvella got $600. The Huang family got $1,400 and a written apology from the interim board. The first written apology in the history of Maplecroft Commons, as far as anyone could tell. I got $150 back. That was my total fine exposure under Wanda's illegitimate rules. I framed the check. It's hanging in my kitchen, next to the window where Darlene's reading glasses used to sit. I moved the glasses to the mantel. Seemed like the right time. The community held a special meeting in November to elect an interim board and begin the process of properly adopting legitimate governing documents, recorded with the county, voted on by members, written in plain English that didn't require an attorney to decode. I was asked to run for the board. I declined. I helped draft the new guidelines committee and then stepped back. I don't want to be in charge, I told Breezy. I just wanted it to be fair. Claudette Farr's story ran in early December. It was picked up by the Ohio AP wire within 48 hours, and then, to everyone's mild astonishment, including Claudette's, by national outlets covering HOA reform. 3 other HOAs in central Ohio came under scrutiny as a result. Two of them quietly restructured their boards and issued restitution payments before any formal complaints were filed. The third is still working through it. I gave one interview. I was specific, measured, and gave credit to everyone else by name. I mentioned Darlene once, near the end, when the reporter asked why I'd pushed so hard when it would have been easier to just pay the fines and move on. She planted a vegetable garden, I said. It wasn't hurting anyone, it just needed to stay. The scholarship was Desmond's idea. With the recovered funds and a matching contribution from Gerald Taft's firm, Gerald apparently felt strongly about putting some good directly back into the community, and I was not about to argue with him. The newly reconstituted Maplecroft Commons HOA established the Darlene Pruitt Community Equity Scholarship. $1,000 annually, awarded to a Riverton area high school student demonstrating financial need and civic involvement. The first recipient was a 17-year-old named Marcus Webb, Cornelius's grandson. The award ceremony was held at the Maplecroft Commons Community Pool, open for the occasion for the first time in 2 years. The smell of chlorine and late autumn air mixing in a way that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Marvella Oates presented the award. She had joined the scholarship committee and turned out to have a gift for public speaking that 30 years in a classroom will either give you or destroy entirely. Marcus accepted it with a handshake and a quiet "thank you" that made half the room tear up. I stood in the back, work boots, collared shirt, coffee going cold in my hand. I thought about Darlene, about garden gloves and Ohio State t-shirts and talking to tomato plants on a Tuesday morning, about the specific weight of a certified mail notice and everything that had followed from it. Outside, 4 streets over, my driveway was clean, spotless, straight lines and good concrete, exactly the way it was always supposed to be.
Wanda Shear wasn't powerful. She never was. She was as powerful as the moment that everyone in the subdivision believes that she has authority, and nobody bothered to check where that authority actually came from. $31,640, 16 families, 2 years. All of that built on one thing. All the rules she built herself, dressed up to make it look like the law, mailed out in certified envelopes, official enough that nobody dared to question them. And Garland questioned it. Not because Garland was braver than anyone else. It's because he had lost enough to have nothing else to be afraid of. A wife, a vegetable garden that she built with her own hands when she knew she was running out of time. A driveway that he cleaned every day and that got fined for cleaning it. At some point, you stop asking, can they do this? And start asking, wait, can they actually do this? Those are completely different questions, and the second one changes everything. The original CCNR, the real one that got recorded at Riverton County in 1998, had no Section 7.4b, no driveway finish rule, no outside decor standards. The ones that Warner used to fine people over the 2 years ever existed in any legally recorded documents in anywhere. She invented the rules, printed them out, and everyone paid. Until one man didn't. If you are living under an HOA right now, do you know what your government document actually said? Not the one that they handed you, the one that is kept on file at your county recorder's office. You can try spending 10 minutes to find and look them up. It can be the most valuable 10 minutes you ever spent. If this story deserves to be heard, share it and subscribe if you want to stay. And remember this, they only have the power as long as you think you don't have any.